So, welcome everybody. I think we're launching a little bit early, so I'll maybe give a few minutes more before we really get going. But I wanted to just welcome everyone to the Earthwalk Ways podcast. So, I'm live streaming now, although I don't have the capacity to multitask and respond to comments as we go. So, you can also join me actually on this Zoom, and we can make it interactive. So if you have any interest in, um, joining me, email me at earthwalkways@gmail.com, and I can send you a link to join the live program. And it's a place to talk about nature and soul. So it amazes me that we take life on as a project and sort of disconnected from source and nature. The mind, the ego, the personality, just, wants to figure it out and do it. And that's a beautiful thing as well. Yet, disconnected from our own soul movements and unaware of the profundity of the soul journey that's taken on earth, we sort of are overriding certain depths and certain connections that are causing us some real difficulties. So on this channel, I like to explore, the more to life that is lost on the modern consciousness. And I've encountered many guides and wisdom seekers over my 75 years. So I like to share from books and my own experience. Perhaps in the future we can include some guests. And again, if you feel you have something to add to this conversation or know of someone else, please send me an email. Again, at earthwalkways@gmail.com, to, let's check it out. I love to just be open to what the energies might bring. Um, so I'm going to continue this session around our theme around the vision questing process. So, this is a time in general where, we have Lent, we have Ramadan, there's this, Chinese New Year, there's this new beginning sense of things that are in the air and part of the natural nature kinds of effects of being on this planet, going through the cycle of the seasons, etc. So I was like also my thing myself, looking at the calendar, seeing if there was a time that I could set aside to do some solo time on the land. And I was sort of looking at this weekend, although it's not working out like I was hoping, but I'm still going to do my best. It's the first beautiful, time after this long, cold, hard winter that we've had. Um, and so I'm going to at least carve out some time to go out because there's, a beautiful thing where like a 4-day immersion can take you so deep and really shift consciousness and help us understand what we're disconnected from. Um, and we don't really apprehend it very well, in our daily life. It's busy, it's full, right? So, but I think inside each one of us is really still longing for something beyond, something more in our lives. And so, um, I think it's just a powerful practice, in general, and even just picking this time, right? So uh, it's hard to not get distracted or have life fill up with something else. And this is a very powerful practice. So, just in the actual intention to pick a time for a nature immersion silent retreat, we're going to sort of almost be up against everything that blocks us. Everything in life will come and kind of pull on us, taking us away from our intent for this time, for ourselves, for connection, and that kind of thing. So I really feel like sometimes, these are just the forces of, life's busyness, but sometimes it also feels like there's almost, an intentional desire in certain aspects of of energies in the universe, to, you know, keep feeding on our busyness, our frustration, our active doing energies, our forcing currents, our upsets when it's not going the way that we want it. So there's this, real sort of way that uh, it's a big deal just to create, just to intend to create a time for a vision quest. So you can even watch yourself, and if you can't set aside, a full 4 days, and even longer, is also fine. But that's a kind of basic time for a full deep immersion. And yet, even just a few hours, even a few minutes, in your backyard, on your deck, greeting the sunrise, listening to the bird song, really receiving a sensory kind of impression of this moment now, and letting your fullness sort of digest that is well worth it, right? We need to fit this in wherever we can. So I want to invite people to really consider doing a kind of immersion, and it can be, like a vision fast in nature the full time, or it can be just a really sort of deep nature retreat where you're spending a good deal of that time, out on the land, and yet maybe having a little more comfort and protected space, for overnight or whatever. But many many ways that this can happen, and I like to try to do an individual consultation and just kind of get to understand what you're seeking, and how we can best support that. So anyway, we need to just find our way to compromise, fit it in here and there, um, and and then when something more is required, this deep dedication that we can feel that comes from an inner call that we really can't resist. And so, this call, if we pay attention to it, it does get stronger if we keep denying it, pushing it away. Um, so, tune in and see if that might be something that, feels right for you for this beginning of this new year. Um, so ask yourself this question, really beyond the daily things that we have to get done, and from the perspective actually of our future deathbed, right? It's like using death as an advisor, is a very beautiful thing, and nature really immerses us into a space where life and death is present. The fallen logs, and sometimes carcasses on the you know on the ground that we run into out there. So there's this real presence of life and death. It's not life versus death. It's a kind of complete cycle, and so it's a very powerful thing to kind of look at our life from the perspective of our mortality. Um, and so when we think of how we are in this moment, and look at it from, if we were going to be dying soon, what is incomplete, what's our longing, what is not met within us that we deeply deeply are seeking. And maybe it's subtle, but there's something missing, right? What would make your life most fulfilling, meaningful, and significant? And what more is there sort of for you beyond the doing, achieving, and maybe even like there's pleasure in that, we do receive, but in some ways it's kind of like a sugar high. We accomplish, we celebrate, and then we're on to the next thing, right? So there's some kind of need, I think, for savoring life at a deeper level. And so how can we do this, and how can we remember to answer this inner call that's saying, yet there's something more than our busy life, making sure everything is accomplished and handled. So, in the midst of all you're doing and achieving, like I said, which has reward in itself, are you really present? And it's interesting because we can actually be in our doing and achieving and be more present. And that can actually really make a difference in the fulfillment that we're experiencing. But to get to that place where we can kind of be active and present at the same time, we need to spend more time learning to just be present and listening. And then noticing also, where we're spending more time trying to control our life than we're simply experiencing the life that we're living, right? Oftentimes our focus is just trying to control everything. And in that process, we miss a direct experience of living with what is. And I think as we learn more and more how to be with that, a depth and richness can come. And we begin to realize the wisdom of the spirit that's in all things, this totality of connection within everything in life, and including ourselves. We begin to realize that we're not separate from that, and that sort of the larger connected flow of everything that's happening is, really something that we are a part of. It forms us. We inform it. It's a beautiful, miraculous unfolding in many ways. So, to the degree that we can sort of let go and see what might be without our attempts at organizing, controlling, making happen, etc., um, we can sometimes discover something, way beyond what we imagined was a part of life here. So in the daily activities, make sure you stop and smell the roses. Even better, set aside a 4-day nature immersion solo retreat. Besides an encounter with nature, it's also an encounter with soul. And it is about discovering the greatness of who you really are and the greatness of the life of which you are a part. We tend to play and see things, we're small, we're like a pebble in the sand, we are very, insignificant in many ways in the totality of this vast universe. And yet that insignificance is not insignificant, right? Like each one of us is involved, is connected, is part of this tapestry, is part of the totality of what is unfolding. And so, to, realize who we really are at a deeper dimension of life than just our kind of current understanding of, our cultural significance of our, you know, life experiences. It's limited in terms of more mundane and more of the just a physical reality and the ways of learning how to survive and cope. Our lower self, the 3 lower chakras, right? Survival, pleasure, and esteem, right? And it's a good thing, that we can go out into the world and create that for ourselves. And it's very painful when we fail or when there's difficulty with that. But it's not the ultimate purpose in many ways of life, or maybe built into all of that is this greater purpose of awakening out of that kind of limited world into a much larger universe that's full and free and deeply, deeply touching, right? This is, we don't feel connected, we aren't so touched, and there's a hollowness and emptiness in our soul because of that. So when I enter the sacred dimension of nature, I always feel that there's something there just beyond my perception, sort of beyond my apprehension and my understanding. It's It's like an intelligence, a presence that is everywhere, and feel it all around, and yet it's also present. It's like it's peering through each tree and bush and squirrel and bird. It's present in it all, and it nests interestingly within holarchies, cells, tissues, individuals, collectives, ecosystems, and so it's all deeply, deeply connected and harmonized, and this presence is within you and I, and it's within everything around us. And it's somehow the more present we get to that, what's present in front of us, what's present within inside of us, the more this larger presence of sort of divine nature, I guess you could say, becomes apparent. And so beyond the physical, we realize that every plant within a certain area is an energetic channel for that area and for its own particular vibration and energy. It's also part of the overall David consciousness of a whole landscape. Notice the feel of each unique nook and cranny. When you're walking, something just sort of calls to you, and you see this sort of perfect, little area that is a work of art, and yet it's completely a random collection of natural, presence. So there's this quantum level where everything seems to be coupled to everything else. And there is an instantaneous presence everywhere at once. And so if we kind of are aware of this and are seeking, like we have to kind of lose our mind and come to our senses in order to connect with this. So we have to, pay attention in the here and now to what's around us, what's inside of us, and not go wandering off in our minds. I mean, sometimes, paying attention in the present will bring a flash of recollection of something else, but that's different than sort of thinking about something, right? Where we actually are leaving our presence and sort of engaged in a mental exercise, thinking about. And that's very different than being experientially in something. So we have to lose our mind, like I said, in order to come to our senses and to be totally present in this bodily experience in this moment. Nature speaks to our senses. She communicates through this channel, moment to moment, unfolding, inviting us to be present to the sort of ever-changing field of space-time that's, wherever we are, right around us. And then if it's a natural area, full of, natural rocks and trees and streams and prairies and oceans or whatever, mountains, whatever we have, it's like there's this beautiful invitation and to enter into that space with it. So in a way, sensation, like is the key. Like we want to, be present in this moment, and the present moment we experience directly through our sensory impressions. And those senses, right, they're a kind of, we know about touch, taste, smell, sight, sound, hearing, so, and we'll be talking more about it probably in our next session. Maybe we'll get to some of it today, but to go into an understanding of the heart. It's an amazing organ, but it's also a sensory organ. And so there's a way in which we're also learning to pay attention, to perceive through that heart space when we go into nature. So sensation can be personified also, like when we tune in, like like how do we, I guess, be conscious of what we're experiencing? And if we're in our sensations, we can describe or notice that, we're listening to a bird song, we're, aware of the breeze blowing through the leaves and creating, like a beautiful shimmer of some kind, and so that, there's many senses involved in all of this, at once, oftentimes. And then we also can, you know tune in through the imagination, and this happens all the time. You see a, knot in a tree and it becomes a face. It's like we, are aware of, the angels, like maybe we're seeing devas or nature spirits or tree beings or river fairies, healers, guides of the forest, right? Like in our imagination, the forest, also can become more alive, with quote unquote mythical creatures, right? That, uh, many, many other cultures have described, and people have experienced. So we might open our scientific understanding, to this in a way that allows for maybe some kind of organizational entity, experience energy, like I'll see breezes coming by, and then, there's the kind that seems like a air mass moving through, right? But then there's these times when, like there's everything is still, but there's some little leaf, like waving in the breeze, right? And there's no breeze anywhere else, but that leaf is somehow just in the right position or something. And when I see that, I also, realize, I think there's maybe something present there. It's getting my attention. It's calling to me. And even if you could scientifically understand that, yes, there's just a little air vortice right there that's happening, it doesn't deny something larger than that. What is that air vortice, right? It's like we tend to think, in these objectified ways. But I think we can invite ourselves to explore more the mythic and the personified, and the way that our imagination can relate, because it really is ultimately about relation and relationship. And the difficulty with our objective observer scientific perception, is that it's intentionally separated. It doesn't want to project or get, involved emotionally or anything like that. And so, just the facts, man, sort of. And there's a way that it's useful. There's information there, but it's empty for the level of the humanity of our being. It's great for machines. It's great for understanding, the, even then it's not really such a perfect understanding, but we can see how forces are interacting, and it's useful to know that. But I think that we still have a long way to go to fully deeply understand this universe, this world, even our own little backyard that we're, living in. And what I want to invite people to do is see about establishing some kind of relationship. So again, you know, the ancient tree, the large rock outcropping, the flow and the cadence of the stream, the gurgling of the waterfall, the energy of the atmosphere, both above and within the forest, the seaside, the mountaintop, a prairie, a desert canyon, right? Everything is alive and everything bears meaning. Everything bears significance and connection and understanding. So when we can get present, to what everything is alive within its own presence, and the more that we're present to it, the more that we begin to really perceive it fully, and then the more a relationship begins to get created. And so, if you are not familiar with thinking about a relationship with a rock or a tree or a stream, you might, explore that. See if you can imagine that it's a conscious entity in some way, um, and that it's aware of your presence, and that it wants to be connected to you as well. So we can explore all of these things in our vision questing time, um, and or just in a beautiful forest bathing walk or something like that. So we can't, as I mentioned, really relate to nature just through our scientific knowledge. And knowing about something is very different than knowing it. And that really is what we're missing. We know a lot about a lot of things, but there's a kind of emptiness in that knowing, in that kind of knowledge. And we really are wanting to know, I mean, almost in that biblical sense, right? The connection, the deep uh, emergence and convergence, and, you know, mixing up of, two things to feel and to know them directly, not about, but intimately in experience. So this is what we're missing. And I don't think we would be so easily disrespectful to other life if we had this felt connection uh, around it. We we would care not so much about the general situation, but about our own relationships in our own backyard, and we can make a connection to a place that's very, very profound and powerful, and especially if it's something that you can go and visit over the seasons, over the years. So, that's one little exercise you might try, is just to see if you can find a place that calls to you to spend a few hours just sitting and noticing what is around, and also within that space, and how it connects with you, what it brings up in you, how you're feeling as you are there. And you bring a lot of your past into that space. So take a moment and see, like, let that interface, and maybe the place will lighten your past. Maybe the place will allow that, maybe some grief of heaviness or something like that to deepen and release in us. So again, nature is a healer, and is, a real helpmate for our own emotional journeys, and working with our life experiences that have impacted us. Um, I know oftentimes the best place to take my deep feelings about something is into nature, and I've always found that that sense of offering wherever I'm at into the bowl of the larger container around me, especially if it's the natural world, is a beautiful, beautiful healing practice that always brings up and allows me to release whatever is held within me, and then opening again, freed to receive the beauty, the bounty, the love, the light, from our natural world. And that, I think, is a hugely healing experience when we can sort of receive that. Sometimes it takes some preparation, and sometimes it takes some time to move through what it is that we're carrying. But nature is always there to support that and help that. And that's another thing that often happens in a vision quest, or a nature solo of some kind. So the forest is teaching us, how to be in a body, how to be in the moment with what is, uh, and what is, mostly a sense of belonging and amazement at how alive and connected we really are. Like when we really arrive there and kind of get out of our sense of separation. Um, it's amazing to see what's actually there for us, and I think that's my hope, is that more and more during these times we're going to, be awakened to this resource, um, this spiritual resource in the natural realms. So I hope that, again, everybody is just, we, in some ways we can learn about it through each other, but we have to find it on our own. So this is really an invitation, to embark and, experience and come into a direct encounter for yourself. But again, you can do this, on a walk around your block. So see, if you want, contact me, because I'm thinking of offering like a little Zoom class where people can talk and share a little bit about their experiences, and maybe get some guidance if they're, doing their own forest bathing. And sometimes I go out into the forest and I'm sort of too distracted, and or something else is with me that I can't seem to shake. And so there's some techniques and some ways that we could support each other on Zoom. So again, earthwalkways@gmail.com. Let me know if you're interested in something like that. Um, so and then as we're available and connecting more, there is a kind of harmonizing that happens. It's an entrainment. It's a kind of, I mean, we even know, like, the cells of the heart muscle, right? They naturally beat, and you put two of them, not even touching, but next to each other, and the field between them allows them to beat together, right? And so there are these, systems of harmonizing. Sometimes I watch the breezes go through the forest, and it does feel like somehow that's a harmonizing influence that, moves things through in a beautiful way. So I feel, when I step outside, sort of a deeper presencing, that if I can let myself connect with it, it calms my nervous system. And so, nature does have some physical dangers, but unless I think we were really, not allowed or had some kind of traumatic experience in nature, most of the time I think our biology naturally responds and, has a sense of harmonization in the natural world. So we sometimes have to go beyond our what we know, and nature can be frightening. I know when I am so familiar with the forest here, and then I went to Brazil, and I was like, what is all of these plants and things? I don't know them. Are they safe, are they not? So we do have to have some familiarity and sense of safety of where we are. um, but that's one of the beautiful things about the forest here in Virginia, is that there's not a lot that we can get in trouble with. Maybe a little poison ivy, slipping on the rocks on the creek, something like that. So let's go back to kind of like, how do we step out of the doing mode? And the Vision Quest is really designed to deeply support that. And it's not so easy. So again, the more time we can kind of devote to that practice, the better we're going to get at it. But it requires that we set aside time in a deep devotion, to this practice of presence. And when we arrange to create this time, because it's probably so new to most of us, we've never ever even had a few minutes to ourselves, or without our phones going, or our music, or our videos or something going. that it can be a little scary right there. Like, what am I going to do with myself? Or, will I be okay if I don't have something to distract myself from what's really here and around me? So, these are the kinds of things that, like an inner resistance, um, an inner, the minute that we try to decide that we're going to do this, like I said, every kind of distraction, every kind of temptation will come to, talk us out of it, right? And one of them is, what in the world are we going to do to fill this time? Um, but it's amazing, like you can't really answer that question. You have to go in not knowing, trusting that you will find something new there, or you will notice that you're doing the usual routine somehow. You're distracting yourself, but again, there's a kind of fishbowl experience in the vision quest where you're very present, noticing what you notice, right? Noticing the outer world, but also noticing who you are, how you're doing things, what your impulses are. It's like it's amazing to see, well, what do I want to do instead of what do I think I have to do first to get everything accomplished, right? To be in this totally open space of freedom, like, what do I do in this moment? And that doesn't necessarily mean active doing, right? It's like, how can we just learn more to be present and aware, and let that present moment fill up our time and space in a way that, really deeply nourishes us. So every time I'm outside, I seek to cross a threshold, from the doing into the being. Like, I mean, I've got a lot of work that I do outside, so even in that, I mean, I'm still practicing, right? But there's the task, the project, that needs to get done. And yet nature is all around and holding me in that space. And so when I can slow down, calm down, remember, right, to do from the being place, it's a much different experience as well. So I think of, much of our lifetimes, maybe before the industrial world came into being, where we mostly lived in nature, on the land, um, and everything that we did was sort of in connection with that. And again, I think that there was a different intelligence that moved through us and within us, and a different consciousness that was generally more receptive, more present, more touched by the moment to moment ways that the sun moves across the sky during the day. So when I seek to cross this threshold from doing into being, um, it's kind of like I go into a space with an intention, with a learning to dwell with it, or to just be, or to pay attention while I'm, picking up, uh, you know, some wood for the fires or something like that. To do that in a flow, to do that in a present state of presence. In gardening as well. One of the tasks that people come here, and if they're doing a kind of uh, work study retreat, I have a big labyrinth up on my drain field, and it's just a very simple labyrinth made mostly of remulching the trails. And so every year, like miles and miles of the lines of the labyrinth to mark the spaces. And so, it takes some time just being out there doing that. It's not a project to think about getting it finished. And so then the state of doing shifts in working on the labyrinth, as well as walking the labyrinth. You can also shift in that. But it's, there's an interesting way that when we have work outside, it's a beautiful way of connecting as well, and reminding our bodies and reminding our senses of, a different style of living and life. So, I want to just put out again that, I have work study retreats where, you can come and, help me on the grounds here doing these kinds of things. And depending on how much support you want or how much, where you're staying and all of that, we really kind of make an arrangement where it can be, uh, where you're covering all of the cost of the retreat through your, exchange, or where you're, doing some of that as part of the retreat, and learning how to connect in with nature along those lines. So come out and try a work study retreat sometime if you care to. So part of what we're doing is we're learning, also to hold oneself and to feel held by a sacred space. And that allows then what is within us that, we have been avoiding, which is partly why we don't want to be empty and open, because we're afraid that that's going to rise up again. And so we've been kind of setting it aside and distracting ourselves to do something else. So, when we create an open time like that, open space, that, then there is this way that, what needs to come up within us, we want to try to create a welcoming space for, and not to fear it. So sometimes some, support in advance of the quest can help you learn a little bit, like how not to, you know, control and worry about that, how to learn to allow things to move through you, to come up, to be felt. Um, so, depending on how worried you are about, coming into certain levels of your own feelings on a quest situation, you might want to do some pre-support work on, facing and discovering how that is. But it's a beautiful, beautiful support that nature gives, and somehow when we can feel that loving presence, and we can also access our own loving presence, um, that there's a way that invites these suppressed, unconscious, denied aspects of ourselves to come in to get our attention. And if we pay attention to the experience that arises and not get distracted, both, away from this, experience, or into a story that your mind has previously created to try to figure the situation out or fix it. It's like we can also sort of get distracted by a story about it that we already know. We've been there, we've done that, right? We've thought about it that way. So part of what we're trying to do is open to the unknown, what we don't know, which is in the body, which is in, the collective of nature. And so when we can just welcome it and learn how to be present with it in our inner being, saying, hi, I see you, being open, compassionate, curious, and aware of something that's arising inside of us. And then also feeling like, we're being held by Mother Nature as well. And the energies of nature are also part of what's, helping move this deep material within us. So this is basically where I learned most of my own journey, and it's, um, nature. She is a healer and a teacher. So if you can, you might discover this for yourself, and again deepen this relationship. It's not just a backdrop. It's not just some place that we're plopped down in, that we're not connected to. Everything that's happening is really interconnected, and you really begin to experience this in a quest situation. So taking at least 4 days in this liminal time and space helps, right? There's a kind of study that was done. It's actually called the 3-day effect, but the fourth day, then you get to spend some time in this new state of consciousness, right? But there was some studies done where they were measuring brain waves, people that were in wilderness settings and not, conversing and communicating with each other. And they noticed after 3 days of being in a natural situation, with not a lot of distraction and external social communication, that kind of thing, that there was a deep shift in the brain rhythms and patterns. So, and you feel this in your quest, like something shifts inside, and all of a sudden, everything is much more present. It's very beautiful. So, in the beginning, it takes about 3 days for us to unwind and, really get there. Because that's how far we are from our own state of presence in our lives in general. So much distraction, so much additional stress and energies affecting us. And so it takes a little while for nature to kind of clear and lift and, ground us back into this beautiful connection with her. And so, we're after that time, we're in this place more cleansed, the clean air, the fresh water. We've been doing light fasting, perhaps, or major fasting, but it's like eating less in general, so we're not distracted with cooking or with eating, and then we have the constant presence of the energies of the sun, the moon, and the stars, the earth and the wind and the sea, and they're calling us, they're communing with us and clearing us and healing us and helping us discover what it feels like just to be, and just to be in balance, and just to be walking in beauty, in the beauty of this earth. So I hope that you can come and give this a try at some point. Like I said, I'm hoping to give myself some kind of focus to rebirth in this new spring. And then last time we talked about sort of many intentions and purposes of a quest. So for me, this quest would be simply to, take some time to separate myself from all the distractions and bring myself present more to the beauty of and the much larger life force of nature. Um, it seems like a good time, like I said, Lent, Ramadan. It seems a natural timing that comes out in the transition of the seasons. And so, again, I know it's hard to take a lot of time out from the daily demands. I want to just remind you that even a few minutes or a few hours of forest bathing can help. So contact me. Ask about the Zoom support group for backyard forest bathing if you're interested. And we can also practice being present to our sensory experience and share with each other around this practice. It's not so much, in nature, although we could also maybe do that as well. But there's nature is in our whole body, is in our being, right? And so we can also get present and tune into that in this very beautiful, sort of focused way of attending to our sensory experience. And that is something that, we can um, practice a little bit, that can serve us. And so if people are working with their own attempts at communing with nature in this way, let me know if you feel like having some kind of sharing group would be useful. So for me, I need to strengthen, and this is kind of what my plan was originally when I was thinking, oh, I might have a few days. Now I have some time during a few days. And more of an intention, because it woke up my intention. It was actually, I went out first beautiful day we've had for a while. So, oh, I need to be out here. Um, so I'm going to, set aside a bigger time after this weekend. But this weekend offers my first opportunity in a good way to take some time to really be outside. The weather is going to be warm, and the birds are, very beautifully singing outside, and spring is coming. So I want to welcome that. So, but for me, I was also, really wanting to strengthen this connection because I know of it and I speak of it, but it's again not an about thing. It's about a doing thing. It's about an experiential, well, a being thing more than a doing thing. But we have to take ourselves out. We have to do the, taking ourselves into nature, and then we have to practice the being. And so in that, what I find is that I make this connection when I do it, but it still feels like it's an effort. It's not just naturally there. I have to remember or remind myself, how to move from one state to the next. And that's important, and good. And oftentimes it feels like it takes a little time. And so in my daily life, I don't feel like I have the time to deeply immerse myself like that. I can take in a few brief sips, of the sunlight, of the breeze in the trees, of the sound of the birds. But I'm hoping that I can go in and again recover this depth of connection within me as much as possible. And again, the longer I have, the more I can, really connect with it. So, uh, I was hoping that this meditation retreat, would also help me support sort of this journey. Like I'm finding myself, you know, understanding that somehow where we are is at an ending and that something is over. And so there's a lot of destruction, like a collapsing of, everything that I've grown up with, everything that I've known. And so while I'm aware probably that that's what's supposed to happen and a larger collective understanding of the earth and her journey, um, I find that personally, deeply, it shakes me. I don't want my comfort to end as I've known it, right? Or the life that I've known, and I have no idea where we're going, right? So it's kind of like also to go back in and reconnect and feel, that presence and strength of nature to sustain me and to, you know in that space, like nature, that's the one thing, she's full of surprises. It's constant change. It has to be change, as much as I don't like to change. It's like that's part of the journey. And so that in this change, there's this way of learning to surrender, and it's not natural to our nature in some way. I think it probably is in our deepest nature, but in our sort of state of, needing to control, needing to survive, needing to feel safe and protected, it's a little bit of a different journey. And so I think we're moving into this, deep time of shifts and changes in everything that has been more or less constant over my lifetime. Certainly big changes. I mean, I think myself of how I grew up in the 1950s and how totally different growing up for children is these days. Um, so, there's been ongoing change, but I think we're at a time where sort of the old system needs to completely collapse and something new arise from the grassroots and hopefully arise out of the depth of our own deeper wisdom and through our own transformation of the fears and the negativities and the distrust and the all of that. Like, it's real because in some ways we're not trustworthy, but I think that we want to be. And I think that there is a movement now, that will separate out and clarify, the deeper ways of, connecting and loving and, caring for each other that we have to, arrive at for a new world to be born. And where we are right now is the rug is being pulled out from underneath the old world. Um, and that's a shaky time. We don't know where we're going. The mind doesn't like not knowing. It wants control. It wants to know. So for me as well, it's to remember this larger structure that I'm grounded within, that is always here, allowing me to breathe, and drink and have everything that I need. It's the forest that supplies us, or all of nature and different resources are within it all. So I need faith in the journey. I need faith in my ability to ground, to trust, and to follow in the state of presence, which when I'm really there, I feel how I can be guided in that state, and I feel strongly at some moments, how clear and beautiful it is, and then in other moments it doesn't feel like I'm connected and I can doubt it completely. So, we're strengthening this new state of being. Um, and I can only feel this state when my heart is open, when I am, grounded and heart connected, and when I can relax enough to contact it. So if I'm in pain or upset, it's hard to contact. And I want to like practice and learn more clearly, some way that can support me relaxing myself, that can support me in sort of activating not my fear reactions, but this divine presence within me, so that, I can be calm and present even in the disillusion, even in the shaking, even in the ways. And from that calm presence, I will be able to respond to whatever is needed. And this is, my hope, my faith, and, my task to sort of build into my system more and more this kind of way of anchoring deeply within my own conscious presence and listening in a certain way that, if the mind is involved, the ego, the defenses, any of that, I can't hear that voice of divine wisdom, that voice of universal wisdom, that voice of, this moment, what is needed now, and what this moment, I'm commissioned to offer. So we're learning, little by little, and that's kind of the focus that I would like to do, is spend some time. I mean, I'm kind of continuously doing this, but it's again this beautiful thing to have this luxury of time and space to really be in a practice with this, and to again touch into the depths of what's available. Um, I don't think I even begin to understand that completely. Um, it's again, I feel like just something calling me. I feel uh, the promise of something way bigger than what I understand from my small self here. That is really what we are all a part of, and what we're trying to awaken to now. So part of this, requires this development of the heart as a sensory organ. And so in our next program, we're going to go into this amazing and little known understanding of the heart. And again, it's this incredible organ, and there's a lot of sort of common sense things that we think we know about it that are being, like with new science and new understanding, revised. And so there's a really interesting section in a beautiful book by Stephen Harrod Boehner that is called The Secret Teaching of Plants. And it's subtitled The Intelligence of the Heart in the Direct Perception of Nature. I don't know if you can, kind of got a neat cover. It's probably backwards for you all, but there's this beautiful description in this book of how the heart works and functions on so many levels, and how our connection with our mental, identity has, and our fear of sort of the feeling state of our being has driven us to function, outside of this beautiful intelligence of the heart. And so the more that we can learn and again practice this, in nature is the place to practice it, the more that we're going to be able to find our way into this new consciousness, into this new earth, this new uh, potential. I think nature is in charge, and she's evolved everything here. She's evolving us. She's the one that creates butterflies from caterpillars. So it doesn't surprise me at all to imagine that maybe humanity is kind of this end stage, is more like, we're caterpillars completing a certain cycle. And that as we dissolve as caterpillars, we're going to be reborn as butterflies. Um, so again, this is my hope of where we're going and how we can maybe get there, and how nature can, is guiding us and will help us in our everyday lives. The divine is with us. Everything that is happening has its purpose. Every crisis and difficulty and frustration, every moment of connection, of beauty, of love, all of that is absolutely, an ongoing part of this movement of nature transforming you from your state of caterpillar into your particular state of butterfly. And so join us next week, and we'll learn a little more about this amazing way that the heart is involved in all of this, and learn a lot more about how the heart is connected. So I know in nature we're deeply invited into the sensory present of each moment. The rustle of a leaf, the movement of light and shadow dappling the forest in a continuous kaleidoscope of light and shadow. I love hearing the sound of the birds and the gurgling of the creek, and I love the beauty of the perfect chaos. How is it that an accidental tangle of trees fallen over and messed up in the forest gives the impression of divine art? You'll come around a bend and there will be a certain configuration of accidental things that is just amazing. So I think we're apprehending more than just the visual, tactile, audible, and olfactory cues around us. I think the experience of this sort of surprising beauty, in the chaos of what appears to be the chaos of nature, is this perception of the heart. It also imbues the beholder with an experience of being touched, not tactily, but touched mystically, touched emotionally. And so I'm just pointing you in the direction of some of these ideas of where this, heart-centered presence will take us. And so that's a part of the practice for me, is to bring myself back to the heart, back to this perception. And part of what is embedded in this touch is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge of the hidden depths of things, which is what we need now to learn to navigate going forward into the future. Okay. So I hope everybody is doing well and finding their way. I'll be seeing you in 2 weeks, and you know give me an email, touch in, let me know you're listening. Any ideas that you have, glad to hear from you. Take care.